Hey, everybody. As we're taking a look here at Galatians chapter 1, I want to speak to you specifically about this portion, verses 18 through 24, where Paul, in sharing his testimony, talks about the contacts he made at Jerusalem. Okay, ready for this? Galatians chapter 1, verses 18 through 24. We read this. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. Now, concerning the things which I write to you, indeed, before God, I do not lie. Afterward, I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was unknown by face to the churches of Judea, which were in Christ. But they were hearing only, he who formerly persecuted us now preaches the faith which he once tried to destroy, and they glorified God in me. All right, let's just get a couple nuggets from this and a point of application. First of all, notice that Paul says, when he mentions there in verse 18, after 3 years, what he's trying to demonstrate there in this sharing of his testimony is that he did not learn the gospel from the apostles. Paul had been a Christian for 3 years before he even met the apostles, Peter and James. Paul wasn't commanded to appear before them in some kind of examination. No, the main point of what Paul's getting at here is that he received his gospel by a direct revelation of Jesus Christ and not directly through the apostles. Instead, he relates in verse 23, look at this line from there. They were hearing only, he who formerly persecuted us now preaches the faith he once tried to destroy. Now, Paul didn't learn the essential content of the gospel from any man, but it's also true that the early Christians were slow in understanding just who Paul was in Jesus Christ. All they really knew was that he had been dramatically converted, and, as it says there, they glorified God for this. But after Paul's conversion, he was what we might call an anonymous Christian for many years. We don't know anything of the specifics of Paul's early Christian service to say that there was anything more than just Paul was part of a local congregation. He served in any way they could. Maybe there was Paul serving in the children's ministry, maybe. Maybe he was helping set up chairs or benches or whatever it was. But he was just doing anonymous Christian service without any note or notoriety. As look, let's face it. When you take all the servants of God throughout all the generations, haven't most all of us been absolutely anonymous Christian servants and will remain so? But that is our glory, known to God, and that's enough for us. Now, in this whole section, Paul is showing that there was enough contact between him and the other apostles to show that they were in perfect agreement. Paul was not preaching a different gospel than the apostles preached, God forbid. But it showed that Paul received that gospel not from the apostles, but from God. This is what he's trying to point out, that his gospel really came from God. Now, let me kind of wrap up with 2 points of application. If Paul is so interested in demonstrating that his gospel really came from God, it's fair for every one of us as believers to ask that same question. What you believe about who Jesus is and what he came to do, and especially what he did on the cross, is that truly from God, or did you make it up on your own? Now, Paul had a unique experience. Paul received it in a vision, in an experience on the road to Damascus. You and I, we get it from the Bible. We need to examine if our Christian experience comes from God, from his word, or if we have made it up ourselves, because this is important. Only what comes from God can really save us and make a lasting difference in our life. That's the first practical point to take away. Is what you believe really from God, from his word, or are you making it up on your own? Here's a second quick takeaway. Paul shares his testimony here in Galatians chapter 1. And sometimes we're tempted to think, well, yeah, Paul shares his testimony. It's a dramatic testimony. Look at who he was. Look at how he came to Christ. And sometimes we have a way of thinking, my testimony, it's kind of boring. God couldn't really use that. Don't you believe it for a minute? We can see the glory of God's work even in those who have a relatively boring testimony compared to someone like the Apostle Paul. God has something special in every one of our stories. So can you explain your story to somebody else? How you came to Jesus Christ and how God has worked and is working in your life? Even if it's not a dramatic story, it's God's story in your life. And that's a second great takeaway for you from this little section in Galatians chapter 1.